This time, the terror doesn't stop at the screen. Here's your look at the new NECA toys. This is the Wes Craven's new Nightmare Freddy Krueger retro cloth figure. A demonic force has chosen Freddy Krueger as its portal to the real world. Can Heather Langenkamp play the part of Nancy one last time to trap the evil trying to enter our world? Figure includes heads, removable hat, and trench coats. Before we do anything, let's figure out how tall Freddy Krueger stands. For this, I've decided to include his green fedora, just so you can get the total height for the figure. Stopping the tape measure right there, that seems as good of a place right there at the top of the head. You're looking at a figure standing 8.3 inches, almost 8.5 inches in height. And that in centimeters works out to be, wow, you did that rather quickly, thank you. I'm getting better at this. 21.1 centimeters, or a little over 21 centimeters in height. One comparison we can certainly make is bringing in the ultimate Wes Craven's new Nightmare Freddy Krueger. I'm not sure, would you consider this still an ultimate figure? Technically, it didn't have a lot in the way of the accessories. It had the alternate head and the fedora, and didn't technically come either inside of a box, which is normally the indicator that these are ultimate figures. It did only come in a clear clamshell, but to be fair, it did have all the articulation that all the other ultimate Freddys would have. So I'm still willing to think that this is considered ultimate Wes Craven's new Nightmare Freddy, the one on the left. Still, though, when you compare them side by side, one can't help but realize that the retro cloth figures are a lot taller. Retro cloth Freddy does still utilize the same body mold as all the other retro cloth figures, but simply just retooling a brand new head and hands and giving it new tailored clothing. You get yourself a new figure each and every time. Usually when it comes to display purposes, a lot of my Freddys and Jasons are kind of categorized by retro cloth figures in one section and regular figures on the other, simply just because putting them all together, you can really see them standing out like sore thumbs when you compare them side by side. Technically, because Freddy is packaged the way you see him right now, we're going to start this review in his disassembled look. I'm not simply removing body parts or anything like that, but when you do get him out of the packaging, he doesn't come with his trench coat already on him. You have to put it on him. One good thing, though, is unlike the ultimate version of Freddy, this one you can actually display in both ways. If you want to really have it displayed just in the sweater, you can certainly do that. Or, if you beeline your way over to the trench coat, you can also have the figure displayed that way. I think for the purpose and just for the fact that we can kind of get some close details with the figure itself, probably we'll start this review, we'll kind of examine the figure, and then we'll go ahead and start dressing him up. Kind of like a demonic version of a Ken doll, if you will. So let's have a look at the figure, and actually, you know what, just before we do that, we'll have a look at the other accessories, why not? He comes included with his green fedora. Still somewhat the same style of fedora, shaped slightly different, and definitely a different color of green versus the normal browns that we normally would expect. It's made of a slightly softer plastic, although I must admit, the plastic type that they're using does feel a little denser than maybe some of the other Freddy Kruegers that we've gotten before. Even like the regular Ultimate figures seem to have a little bit more pliability to the fedora, whereas this feels a little slightly more dense. The rim is still soft, but the top here definitely feels a little bit more dense. The other accessory that comes included with the figure, excluding of course the trench coat, is also his demonic demon head, which for comparison's sakes, let's just bring in the other one that we had a look at. This was the one here that came with the quote-unquote ultimate version of Wes Craven's new Nightmare Freddy. The face sculpts, I would not argue the point, are the same. I feel like there's some slight tweaking that they've done from one to the other. Paint, though, is drastically different. And I might actually even say that I like this one just a little bit more. They've smoothed out some of the rougher details that they've kind of really almost embossed into the plastic here. It's definitely much more defined on the smaller representation of Freddy's demon head, but I kind of like this one a little bit more, that the colors blend in a little bit, and it's not as dark panel lined as this one right here. As you can see, if you look all the way around on both sides, There's definitely a lot more flesh tones utilized on this side than on this figure's head here. And again, this one kind of comes across a little bit too black. Too many of those areas, those recessed areas, are colored in the darker paint, that I feel like this one ends up being the better, superior head sculpt when you compare the two. And why not? Why don't we actually have a look at the trench coat while we're at it? This will eventually go on to Freddy, but I could best probably not spend a whole lot of time looking at it once it's actually on the figure, because then we'll kind of examine the whole thing. We'll quickly look at this now. It's sort of a felt jacket, seamed quite nicely. I mean, you can really see some strong, obvious seam lines, but it kind of plays well to the idea of retro cloth figures. To me, it kind of reminds me of like more higher versions, advanced versions of old Mego dolls I would have grown up with. One thing that's nice, though, is that they've used a different type of material on the inside with the traditional green and red stripes that only Wes Craven's New Nightmare would actually have. He also would be the only Freddy that would have a jacket, other than the few instances in which we got promotional artwork where Freddy Krueger had wore a jacket in the past, but it never really made it to film. The jacket itself isn't terrible. One thing that is sort of problematic about the jacket is because of the natural type of fabric that they're using, along with it sort of comes the restrictions. The collar will be up no matter what, but like in the Ultimate version figure, the front collar, or the front section of the jacket, would be actually more flat. Once you really do put it onto Freddy, this is more, it feels more inclined to want to stick up all the time. You'll know what I mean when we get this eventually onto the figure. So that's all the accessories that come included with them. Let's have a look at the actual figure himself. We'll do some comparisons again side by side. I'm just going to reach off camera to the barren wasteland. And there is the two figures side by side. To the one credit that I liked that this figure did right is it didn't have the weird wonky eye wandering that the Ultimate figure does have. In one way it's good because you kind of have that side angled look where Freddy's looking right at you while his head isn't. I kind of think I prefer a little bit more the eyes looking straight at you. The coloring I actually think is a little bit better also on the retro cloth version than on the regular release. The regular release is too pale in my personal opinion. I think like the slightly warmer tones to his flesh, I think works a little bit better on the retro cloth figure. Sculpt wise, I still think perhaps this is the better figure of the two, but I do have to give points necessarily to this one as just having a better paint scheme all around. As for the sweaters, this is not simply going to be a comparison side to side, left to right. I want to show you also the detailing on the back and forth on the sweater. The green starts a little higher up, works its way a little lower down. You get a little bit more of the green on the Ultimate version than you do on the retro cloth. They probably could have brought the stripe down a little bit so you get a little bit more on the green on the top, but I think I like the coloring once again a little bit more on this one. To be fair, it's hard to change and compare, you know, an actual fabric here versus plastic. I mean, fabric will give you a much more realistic color scheme in a lot of the cases. But, you know, again, if you're liking plastic, then obviously you're going to be going maybe this route versus the retro cloth figure on the right. Sadly, one bit of news to report. When I did get this figure out of the packaging, I did get a pull. And I didn't cause that pull. It was actually when I took it out of the packaging, I noticed, I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's something on that sweater. It's a little bit of a tug. This is almost the same problem that you would experience yourself if you wear a sweater. Sometimes you get these little pulls in your sweater. The last thing you want to do is continue to pull it. I'm going to see if I can lift the sweater up, almost as if what I'm doing right now. Very muscular body underneath. Don't worry, it's not Freddy's. It's just a regular retro cloth body. I'm going to see if I can actually go in there and pull it through, just to kind of hide the fact that there's that little imperfection, sadly, in his sweater. Sweater overall is nice. The coloring on this guy is quite good. And when it comes to things like his hands, for example, the hand pegs seem to keep falling out. Ever since the first time I pulled these out to get the jacket on him, they haven't stayed back in place as well as they should. The more upgraded claw for Freddy is now instead just more bones than anything else. Bones and blades embedded onto the fingers of Freddy's hand. I like it. I warmed up to it. Didn't like it initially when I first saw it, but this particular take on Freddy, I actually kind of like this kind of claw hand. Like I said, it has I've warmed up to it since. The bone work is actually done nice. If you look at it once again next to the original version, it definitely has a much more bone white or bone cream color versus the Ultimate version. Kind of think I like this one a little bit more. So again, points for paint. As for the pants are using kind of like a pleather material. I'm hoping it's not the type of pleather material that over time starts degrading and the pieces start flaking off of the material that they would have used underneath. Seam is actually good. The seams overall are quite good, and you got seams around the legs, the knees. Everything bends quite freely. The material is thin enough that it doesn't restrict or hinder when you are actually moving the legs. Even like when you are bending the knees, I don't feel like anything is really tight and pulling against those joints. I can quite freely move the legs back and forth. He does also have his calf-high boots. This is something that's different for this particular Freddy. Laces are done nicely, as well as the rivets, the little hole openings on the side. Somebody told me once what those were. I don't remember what they are now. But the laces are done nicely, and like I said, the little silver on the loops on the sides, nicely done there as well. Still a problem with, unfortunately, these retro cloth figures. While they're deep, they do give you hinges on the legs, or more importantly on the feet. I really would give anything if they could have actually had articulation where you could ankle rock these back and forth. Freddy doesn't have so much the issue of standing properly, but I've had certainly issues in the past where retro cloth figures just really do have a tough time standing firmly planted on their feet, because often at times their feet are slightly on an angle. These ones aren't so bad, but again, I really would love them to eventually switch and go the route of more multi-articulated feet, just so you can get more proper footing, like I said, for this particular figure. Going back and talking about Freddy's accessories for a second, one thing I did notice, looking at, of course, the demon head, the fedora, and the trench coat, things you would expect, and the fact that the Ultimate Freddy also kind of came with the same stuff, minus, of course, the removable trench coat. The one thing that both figures actually omit is Dylan's little protecting Dino Rex. That would be a nice little additional bonus that NECA Toys could have included with either one of these figures. The one that you're looking at right here, and of course the Ultimate version of Freddy. Maybe down the road, if we do eventually get ourselves yet another Ultimate version of Wes Craven's New Nightmare Freddy, it could have some extra bells and whistles in there. But more importantly, I think Dylan's Dino Rex should have most definitely be included. After all, he got claw marks just embedded into the side of his body. At the very least, they could have thrown that in. Anyways, rant on the side. We're going to go ahead and take the hands out of the sockets. Repeated pullings of these, first of all, when you first take them out of the sockets, a little bit of paint will come off just the peg areas. That's natural. Don't freak out over it. We're going to go ahead and pull the other hand off. And just pop that off like that. We're going to go ahead and get this Freddy all dressed up. After all, we've got a good gander. You know what? Actually, before we do that, let's just put this down for a second. I almost feel like I want to look at his articulation, now handless, of course, from this. Just so if once we get the jacket on, everything is a little bit more hindered. Let's look at it right now. The head moves up and down. The head rotates all the way around, and it also hinges back and forth. He does have not an upper torso crunch, but he does have a waist swivel. The arms hinge out to about there, and they can also rotate forward and back. I'm stopping from rotating these all the way around because you can kind of already see what's happening with the sweater as I twist it and continue to twist it. The sweater is sort of wrapping its way around the shoulder socket. That's a big no-no. We don't want to be doing that. He has a single bend at the elbow. And then whatever hand you would have actually had in the socket, this one or the one over here, would have just had a straight swivel, and it also would have hinged back and forth. You can see the hinge, you can see the peg, how that all comes together. Legs split out, they go forward, they go back, swivel at the top cut of the thigh, single hinge knee, nothing in the boot, and a hinge back and forth on the feet. Producers are like, that's okay. I know we're kind of doing out of sequence. I know normally we would kind of do a different, I'm sorry. I quickly thought on the spot. We're going to go ahead though and get Freddy dressed like we were supposed to do at the beginning of this. Sliding one sleeve, one arm through the sleeve and following it up with the one on the other side. That's usually how you get dressed. And you just fit it over his shoulders. Natural things to be expecting with all of this is the fact that his sweater will bunch up, ravel up his arm. So you may want to kind of just go in there and pull it out. You can also just kind of slowly, like a caterpillar working its way up a branch to feast itself on a delicious, succulent pear. Just going to feed the arms through the sleeves, and then once you get enough of a socket exposed, go ahead and just kind of twist the hands in place. I don't like doing this too much, so I think once I settle on the idea of displaying him with the trench coat, I'm probably not going to keep pulling the hands off, because I just feel like eventually something's going to give way and maybe the pegs are going to break. Now that I've jinxed that, God help us all. We're going to go ahead and take the other hand, this hand here, and do the exact same thing. Slithered caterpillar up the branch, succulent pear, and just rotate that back into place. Again, I don't want to add too much pressure, but a good satisfying, safe snap in place tells me that the hands are in place. And there's Freddy Krueger. Going back to a point I had already mentioned before, not the fact that the jacket is a magnet for hair, but it is. The point I wanted to make before, once again, if we compare it side by side to the ultimate version of Freddy, you can see the, I don't know if you would call them lapels, but the side of the collar folded down looks a little bit more natural when it's on plastic. When you do that with felt, though, which is what I'm guessing this material actually is, it doesn't naturally drape down. I guess you could probably wet this and iron it to give it a natural crease, folding that down so it will actually stay in its place. When you do get it out of the packaging, it really wasn't that much different than what you saw here, although it just kind of stuck a little bit more. The collar being high doesn't bother me at all. It's supposed to be high, but I think I might maybe just take a bit of an iron and seam both sides. I don't mind that it's going to be like that, because then at least it's going to keep the sides collars down. And then we can go ahead and revisit the hat, put that in place, and there's Freddy Krueger. Just for the sake of argument, because I know you guys probably would want to see it as well, we can go ahead and take the head off the socket. I don't know, I've always had real reluctancy when it comes to taking heads off of retro cloth figures. I've had a couple of doomed experiences in the past where I've taken the head off the socket only to actually break the ball joint. I ended up doing that with, I feel like it was Surgeon Freddy, where I actually was trying to twist the head off and ultimately broke the ball joint inside. I think since then they've actually used a smaller cylinder post rather than actually a bulbous ball joint. So taking off the head should be a lot easier, and I haven't done it yet for this figure, so wish me luck. Fears were quickly realized as I realized that they still are using the dumbbell ball joint for these heads. It does mean a more secure fit when you are putting the new heads in place. But one thing that I am, again, worrying about all the time that I'm doing this is the fact that the head, the ball joints are so big that when you do fit them in place, it's a bit of a struggle then to get them back off, and then resulting in potentially breaking those ball joints off. I think for the fact of fighting that back to get the head off and switched back to the defaulted head that I would likely end up using, I'll just simply drape it onto the ball joint so you guys can see the difference between the two heads. The NECA Cult Classics version, the Hall of Fame Freddy, came included with this head portrait. I even feel like the original Cult Classics Freddy came with that head portrait as well, but I feel like it was only the Hall of Fame. So yeah, you could display that figure in both instances, one with the demon head, one with the regular Freddy head. Because this retro cloth figure gives you one figure but two options, it definitely is debatable as to which way you would want to go. I mean, purist-wise, and likely I'll be just displaying it with this. I do like this head portrait, but because it only really appears at the end of the film, I feel more compelled to probably go ahead with this head sculpt instead. But there's the two, and side by side, just in case you wanted to see them. One last thing I'll mention about this figure before we wrap up and close up shop for the day is the fact that with natural fabric being that it is, and you're dealing also with a smaller figure, that the figure will come across a little puffy, because he does have so much fabric on him, and this particular sweater is a dense fabric sweater to start off with. When you're also putting felt as a jacket over top of that, it does make the figure look a little bigger and bulkier. It doesn't look as realistic as, let's say again, that ultimate version of Freddy. But again, there's something charming about these retro cloth figures. To me, again, they look like more upgraded versions of the original Mego dolls that I loved so much as a kid. I never would have had a Freddy Mego doll back in the day, so I kind of like the fact that NECA Toys is doing things like the retro cloth. It's a nice subcategory to what you normally could be picking up as regular plastic action figures. And while this is still good and my bread and butter tends to be more so the Ultimate figures, I still have such a love for the retro cloth figures because, again, it feels like figures I would have grown up and collected if I could have grown up and collected a Wes Craven's New Nightmare Freddy Krueger. Longtime viewers of this channel will know my thoughts and opinions when it comes to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, my least favorite, surprisingly enough, of all the Nightmare on Elm Street films. It had an interesting enough premise. Freddy Krueger looked cool, and I liked the idea that it was something different. But I found the movie was a little slow-paced and a little boring, and I really didn't like Dylan whatsoever in the movie. But that being said, the design of Freddy Krueger still stands out as something different and thinking outside the box. And obviously for Wes Craven to go back and try to do something different, he even has mentioned he didn't really know where to go after seeing all the subsequent sequels that would come out after his successful first outing. Still though, as it goes, even though I'm not a big fan of the movie, I really like this retro cloth release of Freddy Krueger. It's neat the fact that you're looking at this figure now with clothing. Let me specify that a little bit more. I'm not picturing a naked Freddy Krueger, but the idea of giving him real fabric sort of gives him a little extra depth to him. Plastic is fine and generally my preferred medium, but when you start incorporating tailored clothing, you kind of just bring him into a brand new world, almost as if Freddy was brought into the real world in the film. By the way, also get a gander at the box artwork here. Another stellar artwork from the folks over at NECA Toys. I don't know who designed it. It says Devon. Devon designed this. Well done, Devon. But you also notice, too, the shredded Rex being held in Freddy's hand. Something I think is a missed opportunity. NECA Toys really should have included a Rex, I think, with this particular release. Either way, though, whatever I feel about the film, I like this release of Freddy Krueger. I'm more than happy to add this to my existing collection of retro cloth figures and continuing to be a fan of these as long as NECA Toys continues to want to release them. If you manage to pick up this one for yourself, let me know most definitely down below in the comment section what you guys think of the new retro cloth Wes Craven's New Nightmare, or even just let me know what you guys think of the film. Is there anybody else out there that just doesn't like the film? Something about Dylan, he's just annoying in that film. And I just find it was a very slow-paced, slow-burning film to kind of get through. Like I said, I would probably put that near the end of the Nightmare films for me. And I'm even putting that after the remake and after the Dream Child. No, I'm not going to be turning in my horror membership card anytime soon. Either way, though, guys, I always like reading your comments down below. Always weigh in. Tell me, guys, what you think of these figures, and let me know what you think of the films that these figures are based from. Because I always like meeting fellow fans of the same fandom. Make sure as well you hit that subscribe button down below, swing next door to that bell notification, and certainly stay tuned, because there's going to be a whole lot of videos coming your way. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.